This week we're going to talk about Passover, because it's Passover. We had our workshop this past Thursday night. Many of you were there, some of you weren't. I wish you would have been, but I'll tell you this much, that although I go over the same material in the Haggadah every year at the workshop, it's to a great extent, a lot of it's different, and I think you should do it every year, because I can tell you, for me, it takes me about 5 times till I hear a spiritual concept, till it really begins to sink in. So, and if you were there and you felt a little lost through the process, that's fine. I mean, it's just the beginning. Let's see. Passover is chapter 11, page 219, right? Mm-hmm. A lot to talk about on Passover. I'm not going to cover the material of the Haggadah as I did on Thursday night, because that will be repetitious. Passover is a very special holiday, and its significance is borne out by the fact that it celebrates our beginnings as a people. As a matter of fact, the month of Passover, because it is the month of Passover, where we became a Jewish people, in the Jewish calendar is called the first month. Now, even though you would think that the first month should be what? Tishrei, the month of Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the new year. It's the anniversary of the creation of the world. So you should think that should be the first month. No, we count the first month as the month of Passover, because that's when we began as a people. Just like in ancient times, even till today, if you think about it, people used to count, this is the 25th year in the reign of King Tut, this is the 7th year in the reign of King Alexander or something. And of course the Christians count, this is the year 1984 in the reign of our Lord Jesus. That's what AD means. And so even the Christians have this in their counting. So we sort of take a similar track. We count for the number of years from the beginning of the world. This is the year 5754, but this is the first month for us as a people. So this is called month number 1. It's the month of spring. Spring is a time of renewal. I've always said that there are no atheists in Atlanta the first week of April, when the azaleas and the dogwoods bloom. It's like, after the dead of winter, life renews itself. It's total renewal. Passover is also a sense of renewal, rebirth, because we were born as a nation then, and we try to recreate that feeling with all the extensive preparations for Passover and the process of the Seder. We'll go into that in just a minute. We came down into Egypt, 70 souls, family, Father Jacob and sons. They were... Joseph was already in Egypt, and there were 11 other sons, plus his daughter Dinah, and altogether there were 70. How many Jewish people came out of Egypt? Well, they took a census after coming out of Egypt to count how many fighting men they're going to have, so they could form an army with divisions and that sort of thing to defend themselves in case they were attacked, which they were. So they counted some 627,000, something like that. Of men above the age 20 through 50, something like that, who were fighting ability. Well, if you consider that that is population of soldiers, It must represent a population of people of 2 or 3 million, considering their wives and children and the elderly. And so we really became a nation. How many years were we in Egypt? Well, tradition says we were in Egypt for 400 years, or 210. It depends on who you ask and how you count. God promised Abraham that his children will go into Egypt, a land that is not theirs, and they will be enslaved there for 400 years. But the actual counting, sages did, came up with the figure of 210. So whether they were there 400 years or 210, and they counted 400 years from the time the promise made to Abraham or not, or some people say that the slavery was cut short by God because the people would not have been able to endure the rest of it. It would just got to the point where it was too difficult. Nevertheless, if you consider even 210 years, and there's slavery, and there's no other activity to do but produce children and work, we grew very quickly, multiplied very, very fast. And we became really a people. Why did we have to go down to Egypt? Why was that important? It wasn't a punishment for us. I'm going to speak about this on the seventh day of Passover, on the second day, 2 weeks from yesterday. Why do we have to go down to Egypt? After all, we didn't sin. We didn't do anything that terrible that we were forced into slavery for our sins, especially in Egypt. And besides, since it was foretold to Abraham, it couldn't have been for our sins. So why did we go down to Egypt? We went to go down to Egypt to learn. To learn how to live in a world of decadence, which Egypt was, and how to survive that. To learn what it is to be downtrodden, persecuted, oppressed, so we would be sensitive to those who were downtrodden, persecuted, and oppressed. There were many lessons that we learned because we were at the pits, the bottom, and God saved us. That set the Seder, which is Hebrew for order, and which we call Seder night order. Why do we call it a Seder? Not just because it's an order of different things you have to do. We have that on other nights. It's a Seder because it represents the Seder, the order of history, which began in Egypt. It's that we get in trouble, God saves us. There are different names for Passover. It's called Passover, Hebrew Pesach, which means the same thing. God passed over the houses of the Jews in the last plague and did not kill the firstborn like he did the Egyptians. It's also called Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of matzah. There's agricultural significance to Passover. It marks the winter harvest in the land of Israel, harvesting of barley and grain. We'll get to the barley later when we talk about the Omer. Okay, well, let's talk about the laws of Passover. What is chametz and what is matzah? I talked about this a little in synagogue yesterday. As the story goes, there wasn't enough time at the night of Passover to allow the dough to rise when they were making bread for the trip, and so they just took it before it rose, and they took unleavened bread with them, cooked it just a little bit, and they took it with them. Okay. So what is the matzah referred to in our tradition as? The bread lechem
Bread of
ani,
affliction.
a bread of affliction. So it's the bread of affliction. If we ate matzah because we didn't want to wait for the dough to rise for our freedom, it should be called the bread of freedom. Why is it called the bread of affliction? And the answer is it's both. It's the bread of affliction because that's what the Egyptians gave us to eat in Egypt. They didn't want to waste time on letting the dough rise and making palatable food, so to speak, for Jews. So it's the bread of affliction. And anybody who eats matzah for 7 days know how afflicting it can be. And it's a bread of freedom also. So it really has great symbolism there. So we're not allowed to eat any leavening for the duration of the holiday. And the holiday of Passover, according to the Torah, is 7 days. But we observe it outside of Israel for 8 days. I don't know if I talked I talked a little bit, many times, about the calendar change. Briefly, just to hear it again. We have a lunar calendar, and we used to proclaim the day of the year, the day of the beginning of a month, rather, with 2 witnesses outside the Holy Temple would see, 2 witnesses with good eyes, hopefully, a little crescent of the moon, and they would proclaim this is the new moon. Because actually the cycle of the moon is 29 and a half days. So the moon can come out on the 30th day or the 31st day. If it comes out on the 30th day, the month before it has 29 days, right? And then that day is considered the first day of the next month. If it comes out on the 31st day, the month before it has 30 days, and then that's considered the first of the month. Well, it's very important to know what's the first day of the month. The Passover celebrating on the 15th. You've got to know when the 15th is. You've got to know what the first is to know when the 15th is. So if the 29th day is a Tuesday, that means Wednesday could be the first day of the month, or Thursday, if the moon doesn't come out on the next day, on Wednesday. Which means that Passover will be celebrated either on Wednesday or Thursday. You've got to know when's the beginning of the month. And so they used to have this system of bonfires, where they, from Jerusalem, when the new month was proclaimed, they used to light these bonfires on the mountains, and they used to go all the way, the next mountain to next mountain, all the way into Babylonia, where there was a big Jewish community. I mean, hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000 miles away in no time. And then they had a problem because enemies of the Jews started lighting bonfires to confuse them. So they just made a declaration that if you live outside of Israel, and you won't hear the news of when the new month is so fast. It may take more than 2 weeks to get there. So you just observe the first day of the holiday, which is supposed to be a holy day, and the last day of holy day. You observe the first 2 days of the holy day, and you have 2 seders because you don't know which one. And you add a day on the end of the holiday because you don't know actually which day it would be. Okay, so what happens is that in Israel they observe the first day of Passover as like a Sabbath day, and the last day. And here in America we observe the first 2 days and the last 2 days. Well, this has advantages and disadvantages because it gives us more holidays, which is wonderful, but it may be a problem for some. But it gives us also a chance to have 2 seders because we're all sorts of nervous for the first seder. And we're tired and exhausted. Although this year it's a little better because you have to finish everything on Friday. You have a chance to maybe take a nap on Saturday and be alert for the Seder. But you have a chance to get it right the second night. And also we used to joke in New York that the second Seder is for the in-laws. You know, if you have all kinds of family obligations, you go to different Seders. You go to one Seder one night, one Seder the other. But anyway, so we celebrate it for 2 nights, and it's really joyous that way. So the holiday for us outside of Israel is 8 days. The only exception to this ruling is on Rosh Hashanah, which is 1 day. And of course, outside of Israel, we celebrate it for 2. In Israel, they celebrate it for 2 also. because except for Jerusalem where they would proclaim the new moon, there was no way of informing the rest of Israel since it was the first day of the month, the Rosh Hashanah, the new year was the first day of the month, when the second day was, when it actually happened. It wouldn't be enough time, so everybody observed it for 2 days. So they still do that now. If that confuses you, it's okay. Don't worry about it. So for 8 days now, we're not supposed to eat any leavened bread. Now this is part of a process. We begin removing the leavening from our houses. You know, you check the glove compartment of your car and under the seats of your car and the closets and the pockets of your pants and the cabinets and everything. You try to all the places where you might have leavening. That leavening is in many things. Of course, it's bread, it's crackers, it's cookies. You have to be careful even for, let's say, perfumes. If they're made with alcohol, alcohols can be made from grain. Most perfumes today, for instance, or hair care products are made with SD alcohol, which is a certain kind of denatured alcohol, SD40 or something like that, which is made from petroleum, which is fine. You can use that on Passover. But you take a look at the ingredients. I mean, let's see what's in there. If it says SD alcohol, it's fine. You can use it on Passover. But you have to look. Why you don't eat? You don't eat a cologne or perfume. But as we know today from patches we put on our bodies and stuff like that, that our body absorbs things through the skin. And it goes within. Besides, we're not allowed to own anything that's chametz on Passover. You have to get rid of it. Doesn't mean you have to throw it out. Let's, if you probably have hundreds of dollars worth of cosmetics that may have chametz in it. Take a look because and it's very popular in many shampoos to put in grains and things like that. So what you do is you put it all together, all the things that you could find from the things around your house, and you put it in a closet somewhere, and you sell it. You fill out a little form, give it to me, and I'm your agent, and I sell it to someone who's not Jewish, so it doesn't belong to you anymore, and it's hidden and it's out of sight. It's a way out of suffering financial loss on Passover, and it's a way of fulfilling the law at the same time. Even places where you work, you have to check that things that your desk at work or whatever. It is also forbidden to derive any benefit or profit or advantage from chametz during the week. I guess if you're in sort of business that sells products that have chametz in it, you're not allowed to do that during the week, Passover. It's interesting that the thing that becomes chametz is the same thing that's made that you make matzah out of. You make matzah out of flour and water. That's it. Grains. Definition of chametz, leavening, is mixture of one of the 5 grains: wheat, rye, oats, barley, or spelt. I never had spelt, I don't think, but I know it does exist. Yeah, and you could buy. There are certain people who are allergic to wheat, and then you can buy oat matzah. You can get it from. Some people like oats for cholesterol or something like that. Anyway, you.
What they come up with next?
Yeah, you mix any of these 5 grains with water, and after 18 minutes, it begins to sour. And chametz technically means sour. When you talk about sour pickles or sour tomatoes, all kinds of, they're called sours. In Hebrew, it's chamutzim. Sour. It begins to sour, and when something sours, it begins to ferment a little bit, and then with fermentation process, you get air bubbles come in it, starts to puff up a little bit, and becomes fluffy. That's how bread rises. And we add a catalyst to make this happen even greater. When we make bread, we add yeast. But yeast itself is not necessarily non-kosher for Passover. It's the bread. that's made from the wheat, these grains. Rabbis included in this category a rabbinic prohibition that anything that looks like a grain or has the properties of a grain, we shouldn't use on Passover. This was universally accepted by Ashkenazic Jews, but Sephardic Jews did not accept this. This category is called kitniot. Kitniot. Does he mention it here? No. He mentions it, but he doesn't mention the name, I don't think. Well, kitniot. Kitniot are things that act like grains, but they're not technically grain according to Torah definition, like rice, corn. We include in this legumes, like beans and peas and stuff like that could really be dried and ground up and have properties of grain. Now, if we're so concerned with things becoming chametz, why don't we just make matzah out of rice? Right? Rice cakes. And then we wouldn't have a problem with it.
We would have been ahead of our time.
Right, we would have been ahead of our time. Although I suspect rice cakes happens to be an old recipe. It would be simpler. Wouldn't have to worry about it. Because by the time you mix the flour and the water, till you take it out of the oven, it has to be less than 18 minutes. Well, you got to work real fast. And you got to make the flour and eat it, and work it, and then roll it out, and you have to make enough holes in it so the air gets out and doesn't puff up, and then bake it in 3-4 minutes and real hot. I have matzah that I buy called shmura matzah. The shmura is a Hebrew word, means watched, guarded. So a shmura matzah is matzah where the wheat is guarded from the time it was picked and turned to flour that no water got in contact with it. And then I use handmade shmura matzah. This machine-made shmura and handmade. I use handmade shmura matzah, and so the handmade matzahs are really round, like a small pizza, like that. And it's probably what the original was like. And sometimes it tastes very good. Depends on who made that batch. It's really pretty uneven. I like it nice and thin and burnt, crisp. Yeah, well, there's different tastes of matzah. Even though it's just 2 ingredients, flour and water, you can taste the difference in different brands of matzah sometimes. It's amazing. So why don't we use rice? Because the idea is not to avoid the problems of life. The idea is to confront life's problems and deal with them and find solutions. And so the very ingredients is chametz, we make matzah out of. So all these things that look like matzah, the Ashkenazic Jews don't have anything to do with them. So even you have to be careful even things like corn syrup. Most sodas now are made with corn syrup. So people who are real aficionados of classic Coca-Cola stock up on kosher for Passover Coke every year because it's made with real sugar. And the Coca-Cola company is really good about it. I mean, they really stop production to have all the machinery clean out to let us make a run of kosher for Passover products. It takes them 10-15 minutes to do the whole run for the Jewish community here. And it takes them hours to set up for it, which means that they're really going overboard for us because they're stopping their other production that they could have been doing for this. But they've been very nice and cooperating. And as a matter of fact, Rabbi Geffen, may he rest in peace, it was one of the original rabbis of Sheretz Israel who was rabbi here for 60 years.
Wow.
60 years. Climbed up that hill when he was walking home from shul every Shabbos till he was 97. He lived over 100. Named it cardiac kill, by the way. But I should know, he lived to over 100. How bad could it have been? Right? He was the only man besides the family to know the secret formula of Coca-Cola. Because he had, since he lived in Atlanta, he had many inquiries all over the country. He was here, and in early 1900s and stuff. And many inquiries: is it kosher? And so finally, he got the family to let him see what's in it, and he found there was a problem. There was some ingredients there that were not kosher, made from meat products, meat derivatives, and things. I mean, this is after they already moved the Coke from it. And he had it analyzed by a lab at Emory, and he showed them how they can substitute other ingredients that wouldn't change the taste, and they did. They actually changed the formula. And there was a problem with a certain part of the product on Passover because of this. And then they made a special kosher for Passover run every year and changed that part of it. And it wasn't this corn syrup then. So it shows a real sensitivity in that company. And the greatness of this man, that he was able to get people to do things like this. So the advice I have to people for Passover is, except for the fresh vegetables and meat that you buy, try to buy everything that has a label on it that says kosher for Passover, all processed foods. Kroger's at Toco Hills has a huge selection. Of course, there's Quality Kosher, which has the largest selection. There's Authors across the street, which has another nice selection. I mean, there are places to find it. Is it slightly more expensive? Yes, but not incredibly so. And of course, if you're going to be a vegetarian on Passover, it pays to be Sephardic. Because then you can eat rice and you can always legumes and other things like that. Sephardic Jews are Spanish Jews, of course. They never accepted that stringency of not eating things that look like or act like chametz. Once matzah is baked, it's no longer subject to leavening. So therefore, what you take, you can make all kinds of things from this matzah. What they do is they grind it up and they make matzah meal. And matzah meal has become a staple of Jewish cooking ever since, not just on Passover. I don't know, going home and you have fried chicken, you go to a Jewish home and you have southern fried chicken, it's really made with matzah meal and not breadcrumbs to a great extent. And
You use it to stuff up somehow.
yeah, stuff a turkey or whatever. Actually, you're not allowed to have matzah the day before Passover. Actually, you shouldn't even have it. Some people don't have it a week, or some people don't have it even a month before Passover. Why? So the taste of matzah should be fresh in your mouth. The problem this year is that Passover falls out on Saturday night. You're not allowed to eat matzah the day before Passover. But on Shabbos, you're supposed to have challah or bread. It's part of the Sabbath meal. So what do? Well, there are people who will make their homes fully kosher for Passover on Friday, sell everything, get rid of all the chametz on Friday, so they don't have to do it on Shabbat before Passover, but set aside a couple of loaves of challah on a separate table, and go eat the challah, and then go eat their Passover meal or something like that. I have a big problem with that. First of all, getting rid of all the crumbs afterwards, and they will flush down the remaining challah that they didn't eat down the toilet or something. And here you have this challah in your mouth that you just eaten, and then you're going to go eat a meal on Passover dishes and stuff like that, and Passover utensils. It's a big problem. There's a much easier solution. Solution is called egg matzah. There's something called egg matzah. Matzah that's softened, the harshness of it is softened with eggs or fruit juices. And the solution works because you're not allowed to eat egg matzah on Passover, even though it's kosher for Passover, because it's not the bread of affliction. It's too soft. except for people who have trouble digesting regular matzah. They have digestive problems, so they can eat like little children or elderly or whatever. They're allowed to eat egg matzah. It's kosher for Passover, but you're not supposed to eat it. But since you're not allowed to eat it on Passover and it's not considered matzah, real matzah, you can eat it. You can eat it erev Pesach, the day before Passover. So that's what I tell everybody to do: make your houses fully kosher for Passover on Friday, and use egg matzah on your Sabbath meals.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
are you supposed to get rid of your egg matzah before?
Supposed no, you can allow it. It's kosher for Passover, and it can be eaten by people who have digestive problems. You're just not allowed to. You know, if you don't have digestive problems, you shouldn't be eating it on Passover. That's all.
Why do they not have onion matzah on Passover? The same reason?
Any flavored matzah is considered in the category of egg matzah. That's why even chocolate covered matzah is
Softening
problematic by
the
some.
blow.
Yeah. So now these companies used to make chocolate covered matzah. What they do is they make it all chocolate.
Ooh, that sounds good.
They make it all chocolate
Then it's
with
not
pieces
matzah.
with pieces of matzah in it, you know, but not chocolate covered matzah.
Do they make it completely all the way through the chocolate?
Yeah,
It sounds even better, doesn't it?
it's the shape of a. You can buy it by Barton's or something. Now you work all month and all week before, especially preparing. You're getting rid of everything, all the chametz, and exactly. You wait till the evening comes and you take light the candle, turn off all the lights in the house, and you go around the house with a feather and a wooden spoon, and you just wherever you find it, you scrape it in there. And especially if you have kids, it's so exciting. Their eyes light up. Candle, one the feather, one the wooden spoon. Actually, what I do is I keep under the wooden as they take the feather to push the bread into the wooden spoon. I make sure there's a plastic bag underneath it because they that wooden spoon never holds it. So after we finish this is a declaration. It's in the beginning of any Haggadah that any leavening that I have not found, not sold, not put aside to be sold or put aside to be burnt the following morning, may it be as the dust of the earth, like it doesn't exist. We're nullifying our ownership of it. And you can do this whole ceremony in 5 minutes. You can take an hour to do it. You know, as meaningful as you think it would be for you. Next morning before Passover, you burn the chametz. Whatever you have left that you didn't sell, and whatever you collected the night before is a technical burning of it. I just take it out in the grill and I put it there, and then make the same declaration. With there's a blessing. It's in the beginning of the of any Haggadah. And this year, we do this a day before the day before Passover, because the day before Passover is on Shabbat. So we search for the chametz this Thursday night, and then we burn it on Friday morning. How do you kosher your home for Passover? It's a good thing to talk about because koshering your home for Passover is the same or similar to making your home kosher when it wasn't kosher before. So that, it's important to go through this, and all this is in Kasher Guide as well as in here, and some of the same language. Well, you have to burn out your oven. Hopefully, you have a self-cleaning oven. All you have to do is clean it. Whatever in there is no longer food; it's ash. Right? If you don't have a self-cleaning oven, if you have a continuous cleaning oven or whatever, what you need to do is you need to get, really serious with the easy off or whatever on your oven cleaning you do. And I know it's not a pleasant task, right? But you got to really clean it out, and then you got to burn it. After it's clean, I would let it sit for 24 hours and then burn it out for at least an hour. After it gets to its highest heat, it has to be on for at least an hour. And that technically will make your oven kosher for Passover. Some people think that are more stringent and feel that unless you can really get the heat up super, super high, that the oven won't be really clean, kosher for Passover. So there are people who actually, and they do make this in Burlbach, they make these oven liners. They tin and they make these boxes the size of ovens. And you stick them in the oven. And that becomes your oven inside an oven. Right? You can do that. And so some people will have, for the sink, the kosher of the sinks, they have sink liners. If you have a metal sink, a steel sink, it's no problem. You just pour boiling water on it, it koshers it. But if you have a ceramic sink, and some people feel that you can't get it out of the ceramic sink, you should even with boiling water. There's differences of opinion there. Table counters, tops should be koshered or covered. I think the easiest thing to do is to clean them for Passover and just put contact paper on them. I use clear contact paper, so it looks like the same table top. And you keep it on for a week. It's a little messy with the glue when you pick it up, but it's not really unmanageable. It's not. If you want to kosher it, I guess you could take a teapot, electric teapot probably preferable, with boiling water, and just pour it over all the spaces. Put lots of towels on the floor to absorb the water. The stove top, what you need to do that. Say you need to do that on the stove top. Also, pour boiling water over it. Be a little messy, and then burn out. As far as the things that you put the pots on, what do you call them? The burners. If it's electric, you just turn it on. Once it glows red, it's kosher. If it's clean. And if it's gas, you turn it on high and let it go for about an hour until it gets real hot, and it'll burn. And the burners will just turn hot enough to burn out what's ever in there.
Can't you put it in the oven also?
If you have a self-cleaning oven, put it in the oven by all means. Just the ones in my house, the paint would crack off if I did it. So you have to see what kinds you have on there. That's the problem. The practical problem. As far as dishes, kosher dishes, I strongly advise to get separate sets of dishes for Passover. One for meat, one for dairy. In my house, we have one for meat, one for dairy, and another one for the seders. So we have 3 sets of dishes. If this is a problem for you, easiest thing, paper plates. Get lots of nice paper plates, not that expensive, and you just don't have to worry about it.
But you still, with pots and plates,
I talk about dishes. Okay, I didn't get to that yet.
what was it coming?
You don't have to clean them.
You don't have to wash.
Wash them. If you have glass dishes or glasses, the kosher them. Method of koshering glass, since if you subject them to too much heat, they may crack, is to put it in cold water for 72 hours, changing the water every 24. So you can put it in your tub, put it in a cooler, or anything like that. Now, the way we kosher most things is to dip them in boiling water. If you take a silverware and you dip it in boiling water, and the water itself is boiling, but once you dip it in, the silverware itself is cold, so it will bring down the temperature of the water. In order to maintain the high temperature of the water, what you need to do is you take out like a hot rock, and I mentioned this last week, maybe about half the size of my fist, or the size, it doesn't matter, even this big. You put it on the burners, and you let it burn a little bit, and then with a pair of pliers, take it up, and you put it in the water, and it'll bubble, and it'll keep the temperature hot when you kosher it.
The rock has no other significance?
No.
Any kind of rock.
Yeah. You don't have to use a rock. You know, at the time you can use a piece of metal, like a wrench or something like that. Anything that'll hold the heat. That's all. That's the only reason for it.
Then
really.
you have to pull it out and heat it up again?
Well, that's why I have several rocks.
Well, that's what I meant.
Goes down, you put another one in. You know, it's that you see it's not working anymore. It's not bubbling. Put another one in. So koshering silverware, you just take a kosher for Passover pot, put boiling water in it, and you just boil it. And you dip, and water has to surround it all on all sides. If you're holding it with a pair of pliers and dipping it in, just dip it in, let it go in. After you do a number of them, just take them out, rinse them off in cold water. So the pores will close and they'll remain kosher. But it's not that expensive. It's easy for me to say though. You can go to Target and you can get a set of flatware for fairly inexpensively, and it really pays to have separate silverware. Some people say that according to the Talmud, you really shouldn't kosher earthenware dishes, because even though boiling will kosher it, or might kosher it, they may crack, and therefore you may not do a thorough job for fear it may crack. But there are authorities today who would permit, if people have special heirlooms or they're poor and they can't afford or whatever, if they have glazed china, for instance, on both sides, to dip that in boiling water, and if it doesn't crack, you can make it kosher. I think the best thing to do is to buy new, but you can use your judgment there. One thing, when you're dipping in boiling water on Passover, to make something kosher for Passover, if you dip, what you're dipping is not kosher to begin with. Many sages say you should dip it twice. Once to make it kosher, and one second time to make kosher for Passover. And
But once you make it kosher, it's kosher until you put leavening to it anyway, isn't it?
yeah, but you're saying something that's not kosher, for instance. So you dip it in, and everything comes out. It should technically be kosher and kosher for Passover. But I guess the thought is symbolic to just do it twice.
So the pot you use a kosher in, is that kosher?
That should be kosher for Passover. You can kosher it. You make it kosher. What you do is you can fill it with boiling water to the very top of the boil. You put some rocks in it. It'll boil over. I mean, the inside is now kosher. The outside isn't. You have to dip the outside in boiling water, a bigger pot.
Or pour it over in the sink.
Well, if you have a big basin, for instance, if you have a big basin, a big pitcher that's metal, you can fill that with water and boil it, and use everything kosher that. It's something like that. So just paste maybe buy one big pot.
Buy one new big pot. Then that make that the koshering pot, and that's the end of it.
And then once you kosher, you have to decide whether it's going to be dairy or meat. Okay.
No, pot you wouldn't have to put a pot. It's the item that you found.
Jews have lots of kitchen utensils.
We eat a lot.
That's why Jews have big kitchens. Big
So-
kitchens.
You buy anything new, you're automatically supposed to kosher it?
No,
No?
it's kosher if it's new. You don't have to kosher it. The other issue is if you buy something that's new, we'll talk about this at another time. Many sages feel you should take it to the mikveh to sanctify it. Not that doesn't make it kosher, but to sanctify it. Even if you don't do it, whatever you cook on it is still kosher. So we talk about mikveh, and we'll talk more about that and what that means. There's a custom of fasting of the firstborn the day before Passover, because that's that night when the firstborn were killed in Egypt. So it's the firstborn male from the womb. No, it's the firstborn from the womb if it's a male. Right? The firstborn from the womb if it's a male. So if there's a girl first and then a boy, the boy doesn't have to fast. because that's what was killed in Egypt. And if the mother had a miscarriage, especially after after 2 or 3 months, then the subsequent issue from her womb, if it would be a boy, is not considered firstborn. Not the first from the womb. This year we can't fast the day before Passover because it's Sabbath. And we don't fast the day before that because it's Friday. And we don't normally allow fasts on Friday that lead into the Sabbath. There's one exception, I'll get to that later. So the fast of the firstborn this year is pushed off to Thursday. Now what if you don't want to fast? These firstborn males don't want to fast. They come to the synagogue in the morning and they attend a special ceremony that has with it a sudat mitzvah, a meal that is a mitzvah. For instance, if there was a bris in the synagogue, a circumcision, and they were attending it, it's a mitzvah to eat at a bris. It's a mitzvah to celebrate with food or have joyous occasions. That's why it's really important to me that people get married, Jews get married, and they have a non-kosher affair because the food is part of the sacraments of the wedding. So they will be allowed to eat at this meal. That's a mitzvah. If it was a wedding, or if it was a bris, or more commonly the completion of a tractate of Talmud, which is considered a joyous occasion. So if the rabbi studies a tractate of Talmud, for instance, and he shares the completion of it with his congregation, make the completion ceremony, which I'll do Thursday morning, and everybody participates in that. Even their firstborn is allowed to eat, and they will have a breakfast this Thursday morning. Okay. Page 230 has a diagram of the Seder plate, right in the middle of the page. Let's talk about it a little bit. I guess I have to talk a little bit about the Seder. Let's see how much you remember about the symbolism of all this. I'll let you cheat. You can take a look, see if anything is in there. The egg, the shank bone, the bitter herbs, the vegetable, the charoset, the salt water. Where I see that? Okay. The egg. Egg is a difficult symbol. Hard for people to understand. It's a burnt egg. That egg symbolizes the holiday sacrifice that's normally made on every holiday. And it's burnt because you can't bring that sacrifice because the temple is destroyed. It's a remembrance of the temple that was destroyed. We also eat eggs later in the Seder. Although it's not in the Haggadah, it's a custom. And right before dinner, right before we eat dinner, we eat a hard-boiled egg dipped in salt water. And eggs have a great symbolism. The longer you cook it, the harder they become. The more you press the Jew, the stronger he becomes. And a shank bone. What's the symbolism of the shank bone? Anybody? Huh? The lamb. What about the lamb? What?
Something to do with the Egyptians.
Well, what about it?
One of their sacrifices.
One of their gods. The lamb was a god of the Egyptians. It took a lot of courage for the Jews to take a lamb and sacrifice it. A lot of what we call in Yiddish chutzpah. It's very hard to translate that word. The chutzpah is like the Mendez brothers pleading to the court for mercy because they're orphans. You know, they killed their parents and they're pleading for mercy.
Is it
That,
like a lot of nerve?
that's, yeah.
And then some.
And then some, yeah.
That's what's. Shankbone. What they did? Not only they took the lamb in front of the Egyptians, which is their god, they took its blood and they put it on the doorposts. I'm putting the blood of your God on the. It was a lot of courage, so that God would see it and pass over these houses and not kill the firstborn. Well, God didn't know who the firstborn Jews were. Of course He did. Why did He want them to put the blood on the doorpost? Because He wanted the Jews to have demonstrate the courage to do this. Because it was part of the process of removing the slave mentality from within. Bitter herbs symbolizes the
The bitterness of
bitterness of
Slavery.
slavery. The vegetable, we call it the karpas, could be celery, parsley. Some people use a potato, but most people think you should use a green vegetable. We dip it in the salt water, right? What's the symbolism of the salt water?
Tears.
Tears. And the green vegetables is symbolic of
Like spring.
spring, which is the month of Passover is called the month of spring, Chodesh Aviv. The charoset, which is made of what?
Apples and
Apples,
nuts.
nuts,
Mortar and the bricks.
mortar and the bricks, apples and nuts and honey and cinnamon, and it's good.
And you put raisins in it.
Wine,
Well, that's all I eat almost all through Passover. It's
Right.
the
Haroset.
mainstay, yeah.
good for
You put
you. It's
raisins.
healthy.
Can you use raisins?
Well, Hasidim, Sephardim have a custom putting dates and raisins in. It's good. You can put it in, no problem. And the question I have, I didn't ask on Thursday night, and maybe I should ask this in one of my sermons. Charoset is symbolic of the bricks. When Moses came to Aaron, to Pharaoh, and he says, "Let my people go," Pharaoh said, "You people are lazy. Now I'm going to make you get your own straw, and make your own bricks for my store cities and for my for whatever they were building the pyramids." Now, you could think that was a bitter part of the experience. But anybody who's eaten charoset would tell you it's anything but bitter. It's very sweet, delicious. So why is that not bitter? Like the bitter herbs, right?
Because they're talking about freedom somehow.
Right. But it's a reminiscence not of the freedom, it's a reminiscence of the baking of the bricks, which is part of the freedom process. From my point of view, it's because there was a bitter side to slavery and there was a sweet side. The sweet side of our experience in Egypt was that we became the people. And we learned all these valuable lessons that I talked about before from the slavery experience of being compassionate, of reaching out and helping the oppressed and that sort of thing. So again, there was a bitter side and a sweet side. As a matter of fact, when we eat the bitter herbs, what do we do with it? We dip it in the charoset to show both sides. So that's the Seder plate. I mean, symbolism is wonderful. You're really eating history.
Not in calories, it's heavy in history.
No calories. My staple on Passover is matzah and cream cheese.
I like
Matzah and tempeh cream cheese.
I like matzah pizza.
Matzah pizza. My family dies for me to make matzah pizza. I do, and I'm the only one who makes
I
it.
used to make it in college, and my roommates couldn't figure out what I was doing because I would.
First of all, I take the shmura matzah, which is size of a small pizza, right? And I take kosher for Passover tomato sauce, and I put it on there, and I sprinkle mozzarella cheese, which I chop up all over, and I put some more sauce on, and I put garlic and fresh oregano, and it's good.
At one time I used to dampen the matzah
Getting
just
hungry.
a little bit. You can't dampen it a lot or it gets soggy, but just a little bit.
I don't dampen it because it becomes soggy when I put it in the oven. From all the tomato sauce.
Yeah.
I don't use that. I must not use that much sauce.
Well, to each his own. But
Yeah.
everybody has a favorite Passover recipe. There are people I know who make their own recipes for Passover bagels.
Huh?
That's right, Passover bagels.
It would be hard.
It sort of spoils the problem with Passover is if no, they're not. They're light.
Really?
They're light and fluffy.
Spoils the symbolism.
It spoils the symbolism, and also if you happen to have a cholesterol problem, Passover is very hard because everything is egg yolks. Use eggs to make it puff up. And my mother-in-law makes a sponge cake, legendary, 14 eggs. It's this high.
Take 3
This side.
Mevacors.
Yeah. I don't need it, but just can't. I mean, just it's really orange, and it's not from any flavoring that she adds.
The biggest problem with Passover for me is just eating more and more because you don't fill up.
Yeah. So the idea is to fill up on good vegetables, good wholesome vegetables. Be a good vegetarian. Eat 60, 70% vegetables, salad and cooked vegetables.
But that matzah and butter is just, or margarine is just so good.
Listen, it's better than we were kids. We had matzah and schmaltz.
Oh,
What's that?
You know what schmaltz is? Chicken fat.
pure chicken fat. It's just kind of like.
It's come in a jar,
Yeah.
like Crisco, right? Oh,
He's
it's
serious.
wonderful.
Like the skin on the chicken.
Times have changed.
Do you ever have gribiners? You know, that's the parts of the behind of the chicken where all the fat is. And they used to take it and fry it up and they used to sell it. I mean, just
No wonder my grandmother died of a heart attack.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I thought we weren't supposed to use or eat fat, but we use for the temple sacrifice.
and we're not supposed to eat the chalev, which is a fat that exists only in cows and lambs, which is the lumpy cellulite fat in the rear. But the other fats in the animal you're allowed to eat. And the chickens, of course, you're allowed to eat the fats, no question about that. Okay. Any questions about Passover? It's very hard for me in 1 hour to sit and give you a digest of what's important in Passover.
Digest. That's.
Yeah. Which really points to the meaning of the Seders. To understand something, you say to digest it. Well, we understand, but a lot of the understanding on Passover is through the eating, and through the participation. It's a process, you work at it, you exhaust yourself, you cleanse your house, you feel cleansed. You feel the joyousness of the Seder and the singing and the spirit that's engendered, and everybody comes together, and family, no matter where you are, the Jew feels on Passover, you should be together with family. And people come together, and so there's typically a lot of laughing, and maybe some crying, and maybe some yelling and fighting. And
That's closer to it.
but it all happens together with family at the Seder. And it's where we should be. It's where we should be, home. And even if we can't be home, and even if you haven't established that home yet, you get together with other people and you create your own. It can be done. There's a second. By the way, those who don't have a Seder, there's a second Seder here on Sunday night, next Sunday night, in the synagogue. It's being run by young couples and single parents and that sort of thing. And I'm not even involved in it. I'm involved as an advisor, but it's going to be very nice of people getting together. It's going to be small, probably about 40, 50 people, and it'll be wonderful. And if you find yourself without a Seder, want to make reservations, call the office and do it. I mean, it's just you shouldn't be alone on Passover. Okay? Any questions?
You say it's okay to have honey during Passover?
Yeah, oh yeah, any melons? all the melons, only, I think, any fruit,
Honey.
any,
Oh, honey.
honey is
Bee
fine.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Honey should be prohibited according to our laws of kashrut because it's a product of insects, right? But the Torah specifically tells you you're allowed to have honey, so you can have it. So all fruits, all honey, all vegetables except for legumes and grains, you be careful with. Let's go over the schedule because it's going to be complicated. Next Sunday we can't meet. It's the first day of Passover. I hope you all come to synagogue. Following Sunday is the last day of Passover. Which is April 3rd. So no class. The following Sunday, April 10th, is Yom HaShoah. It's the talk to you about that for a second. It's very important to develop a sense of community, of being part of the Jewish people. And so that celebration, that commemoration should be something that you do, that you be part of. And so that's going to be at the Greenwood Cemetery. I don't know if you know where it is.
South Cascade.
So, go down I-20 west to exit, I think it's 18, which is Cascade Avenue. You make a left, and you go down about half a mile, make a right, which is actually Cascade. And pick up the cemetery about a mile and a half.
That's April.
That's April the 10th. At 10:30. And the Jewish community gathers. There's a memorial at the cemetery for the 6 million, and it'll be a really an important day. It's also Beth's wedding that night. Should be nice. By the way, Nicole and Jeff got married last night. It was very nice. They send their regards. April 17th, which will be the next time we can meet. I'm sorry. There's a lot going on. Now, I have a problem meeting at regular time, again, because I have an unveiling at 10 o'clock, but I can meet at 11, really at 11. I don't have any other program beforehand to keep me away. The 24th,
Yeah, really.
24th we might have to meet at 11 as well. I'll have to let you know about that. So I have a program with the Hebrew School. Of course, following week we can't meet because there's a retreat. Synagogue is going to the Lanaga, Helen, whatever it is up there, and it's going to be. If you want to participate, I hope you do. I mean, it'll be a way of you being able to really find a complete Shabbat experience if you've never done it, to live it for a weekend. So that'll be April 29th. Yes.
What about the Thursday night classes? Are they still?
They're done. They're done. They're done. However, those of you who are interested in the meditation classes, continuing like what we did with Fred Ravid, it's a very profound message. Show you the layers, the depths of Torah. The Aleph Bet is a wonderful system, but it's not just letters, as you may have guessed. They represent numbers and all kinds of things. We have a concept in Judaism